Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Robert Adams, and joining us from the Australian Army is Warrant Officer Class 1, Joanne Davey. Today we commemorate the 105th anniversary of the Battle of Hamel. In the early morning of the 4th of July 1918, 3 Australian infantry brigades, along with a British tank brigade and supporting artillery fire, captured the village of Le Hamel in northern France. To give combat experience to the newly arrived American Expeditionary Force, companies from US Army battalions were included in the assault. The date for the attack, American Independence Day, was chosen to mark the first time American doughboys joined Australian diggers in battle. Lieutenant General Sir John Monash, commander of the Australian Corps, planned the assault meticulously, estimating it would take 90 minutes to capture the key objectives. In fact, victory took 93 minutes, a stunning success at the cost of minimal casualties, which has been called a turning point of the First World War on the Western Front, the first modern battle, and the perfect battle. While small in scale, Monash's coordinated use of tanks, artillery, infantry and aircraft at Hamel provided a model for later offensives which overwhelmed the German frontline defences and led to the Allied victory of November 1918. This afternoon we hear the story of an Australian soldier whose name appears on the Roll of Honour. But we also commemorate our American brothers in arms. Among those who fell during the battle was Private Richard Ludke of the 33rd Infantry Division, which had trained at Camp Logan in Houston, Texas, before coming to France. During the assault on Hamel, Ludke had left his platoon and was with Australians when he was struck by a shell and killed instantaneously. An officer who knew him reported that he entered the action in great spirits and had no fear for himself. Today we remember the first battle for Hamel. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. This evening we warmly welcome the Defence Cooperation Scholarship Program delegation, including foreign military personnel and representatives from the International Policy Division, Department of Defence. We also warmly welcome Mr. John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia ACT branch, and Air Commodore Peter McDermott, National Vice President of the Air Force Association. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of Fremantle Christian College from Hamilton Hill in Western Australia. If you're able, I now invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
All land abounds in
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they have done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Frederick Harold Sessarago. Frederick Sessarago was born in 1897 in Goulburn, New South Wales. Known as Fred, he was one of 10 children born to barman James Sessarago and his wife Emily. Fred spent much of his childhood in Goulburn before moving to Queensland with his family. When the First World War broke out in 1914, he was working as a plumber. Fred Sessarago enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 27th of October 1915. He joined C Company of the newly raised 42nd Battalion and began a short period of training. He was made Provisional Corporal in 1916 and embarked for active service in June, sailing from Sydney on board the troopship Border. After several weeks at sea, Sessarago arrived in England, where he continued training before making his way to France in November 1916. His unit entered the trenches for the first time on the 23rd of December, spending much of the bitterly cold winter on the front lines. Like many who suffered from the miserable conditions on the Western Front, Sessarago became ill, spending several weeks of January 1917 in hospital. His unit later participated in the advance that followed the enemy's strategic withdrawal to the Hindenburg Line before being transferred to the Ypres sector in Belgium. On the 7th of June 1917, Sessarago took part in his first major battle of the war when Allied forces attacked enemy positions at Mezzine Ridge. Following the attack, the 42nd Battalion was engaged in defending ground taken during the battle, and Sessarago was promoted to Company Sergeant Major. After a brief period in hospital with pleurisy, Sessarago and his comrades fought at Brucinder Ridge and Passchendaele in October, suffering badly from gas attacks and the sodden conditions of muddy Flanders. Sessarago was commissioned to second lieutenant in November and spent the remainder of the year rotating in and out of the trenches throughout another cold and wet winter. In early 1918, Sessarago was granted a period of leave. Shortly after his return to the front, German forces launched their spring offensive, which sparked a series of strong attacks along the Allied front. During this period, the 42nd Battalion helped to repulse multiple attacks and played a role in blunting the drive towards the vital railway junction of Amiens. In May, Sessarago was made first lieutenant. By June, the enemy's offensive was grinding to a halt, having largely failed to make any real breakthroughs. Allied forces began planning to launch their own major offensive, striking while the enemy was weak. In preparation, they set their sights on the strategic town of Hamel. Capturing this area would provide them with a foothold in the Somme while allowing defence of Amiens. The attack used tanks, aircraft, infantry and artillery to make a coordinated attack on enemy lines. Planned by Lieutenant General John Monash, he anticipated it would take 90 minutes for the troops to take their objectives if the attack went as planned. When Sessarago and his comrades advanced on the 4th of July, the all-arms combination quickly proved successful and the Allied forces took their objectives swiftly, with few casualties. The battle was won within 93 minutes, with Australian units suffering more than 1,000 casualties during the attack. Among the dead was Lieutenant Fred Sessarago, who was killed by shell fire while rushing an enemy machine gun post. One of his comrades wrote to Sessarago's parents, "Fred belonged to our sister battalion, and as we saw much of one another, I began to consider him as one of my best friends. In fact, our friendship had just firmly established when, to my great sorrow, he was snatched away from me. He was a dear lad and was beloved by all." As for bravery, others can ably testify to his courage during all operations undertaken by his battalion. In fact, it was during the achievement of one of the brave acts that he met his death. Finding his platoon to be held up by a hostile gun, he and one of his platoon bravely rushed the gun, while doing so as he was struck by a piece of shrapnel. The war has brought several heavy blows on a youngster like myself, but none so great as the loss of dear Sess, as he was called. Bright and cheery, one could never be down in the dumps while in his presence. However, as the poet says, "'Tis sweet and glorious to die for one's country." Lieutenant Fred Sessarago was 21 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Frederick Harold Sessarago, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you are able, I now invite you to please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we the left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over, but in Australia they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.